She was one of the most photographed human beings who has ever lived, captured on film hundreds of thousands of times across 7 decades on the throne. And yet, there were small, ordinary objects in her hands and at her side that most people never thought to look at twice. A handbag hooked over one arm, a simple, ordinary glass before lunch. A radio quietly crackling beside her breakfast. To the world, she was a queen, distant and gilded and untouchable. But the truth of Queen Elizabeth II lived in these everyday things, the objects she touched every single day, many of which carried secrets that would astonish you. Some of them were tools for sending hidden messages no one in the room could detect. Some of them were so humble, so cheap, so utterly normal that they seemed impossible for a monarch to own. And some of them held stories that stretched back through love, through war, through a century of history pressed into a single object she kept close until the very end of her life. Tonight, we're going to look closely at 15 of these things, the objects of an ordinary day in an extraordinary life. And by the end, you will never see this woman the same way again. Let us begin with the most famous object of all, the one that became as much part of her image as the crown itself, the handbag. Wherever she went, whatever she wore, there was almost always a structured little handbag hanging from her left arm, and it was never an accident which arm. By keeping the bag on the left, she left her right hand free to shake the endless stream of hands that a queen must shake to receive flowers, to greet the thousands of people she met every year. The bags themselves were made by a British company called Launer, and they were not bought off a shelf. Each one was bespoke, crafted from the softest calf leather with short handles, designed specifically so the bag would not get in the way when she reached out to greet someone. Her favorite style was a shape called the traviata, with a distinctive twisted rope clasp. And over the course of her life, it is believed she owned around 300 of them. 300 handbags, each one a quiet, deliberate piece of a carefully constructed image. The responsibility of caring for this vast collection fell to her most trusted dresser and aide, and the bags were treated almost like precious instruments rather than mere accessories. They were never showy, never flashy, never the kind of enormous designer statement bag that other famous women carried. They were modest, practical, and perfectly proportioned, large enough to hold the small essentials she liked to keep close, but never so large as to overwhelm her frame or interfere with the constant, gracious business of being a queen. Inside, on any given day, you might have found a pair of reading glasses, a tube of lipstick, a few mints, some tissues, a diary and a pen, and treats for her beloved corgis. But here is where the ordinary handbag becomes something far stranger, because that bag was not just for carrying her belongings. It was a weapon of communication, and almost no one watching ever realized it. The Queen used her handbag to send silent, coded signals to her staff, messages that floated invisibly across crowded rooms. According to those who studied her closely, including royal historians and the people who knew her best, the placement of that bag was a secret language. When she shifted the handbag from one arm to the other during a conversation, it was a signal that she wished the conversation to end, a quiet plea to her ladies in waiting to come and rescue her. When she set the bag down upon a table at a dinner or an event, it meant something more urgent, that she wished to leave within the next 5 minutes, and that her staff should begin to wrap things up. And the most dramatic signal of all came when she placed the bag on the floor. That meant she was trapped in an uncomfortable encounter and needed to be extracted immediately, pulled away by an attentive aide before the moment grew any more awkward. Imagine the scene. A guest, thrilled to be speaking with the monarch, having no idea that the small movement of a handbag had just summoned their polite removal. For a woman who was reportedly quite shy by nature and who endured a lifetime of small talk with strangers, that handbag was an escape hatch, a tool of mercy, and one of the most ingenious uses of an everyday object you will ever hear about. The second object never left her finger, and its story is so romantic that it almost belongs in a fairy tale. Her wedding ring. When Prince Philip set out to marry the young Princess Elizabeth in 1947, he was not a wealthy man, and he did not have the means to simply buy a grand ring befitting a future queen. So his mother, Princess Alice, gave him something of her own. She handed over a tiara that she had worn on her own wedding day, and the tiara was melted down, its diamonds repurposed to create the engagement ring. For the wedding band itself, a nugget of pure Welsh gold was supplied, gold drawn from the land of Wales, and from that single nugget the ring was fashioned. Philip even had a private message. Engraved inside the ring, an inscription known only to the two of them, a secret they carried for the rest of their marriage and never revealed to the world. But this ring of love had a second hidden purpose too. Just like the handbag, the wedding ring became a signaling device. When the Queen was seen to twist that Welsh gold band upon her finger, it was another quiet message to her ladies in waiting, another way of communicating without a single word being spoken. A symbol of devotion, doubling as a tool of royal diplomacy. Think about everything that single small band of gold contained. The sacrifice of a mother who gave up her own wedding tiara so her son could propose. The pride of a nation that supplied the very gold from its own soil. A hidden message of love that no historian, no biographer, no journalist has ever managed to uncover, sealed forever inside the metal where only 2 people ever knew its words. And then, layered on top of all that romance, a practical secret function, a way for the busiest woman in the world to call quietly for help. It is almost impossible to imagine an object more densely packed with meaning, worn day after day, decade after decade, on the hand of a woman who waved to millions and yet kept the most important words of her life a perfect, private secret until the day she died. The third object is one that almost no one would expect a queen to carry, and it reaches all the way back to her girlhood. A penknife. Tucked away inside that famous handbag, Queen Elizabeth reportedly kept a small folding penknife, a habit that traced back to her days as a young girl guide. The Girl Guides, much like the Scouts, prized preparedness and practicality, and that lesson clearly stayed with her across an entire lifetime. Here was the most powerful woman in the Commonwealth, the head of state of more than a dozen nations, and inside her bespoke leather handbag, alongside the lipstick and the reading glasses and the mints, sat a humble penknife, the same kind of simple, useful tool a practical girl might carry on a camping trip. It is a small detail, but it tells you something profound about her character. Beneath all the ceremony, she was a person who valued being ready for anything, who never quite let go of the practical lessons of her youth, and who saw no contradiction between wearing a crown and carrying a pocket knife. Fictional bear known for his obsession with marmalade sandwiches. In the sketch, she reached into her famous handbag and pulled out a marmalade sandwich of her very own, explaining with a twinkle that she always kept one in there for emergencies, for later. The world laughed and adored her for it, but here's the truly wonderful part. While the sketch was scripted fun, the affection was real, because the Queen genuinely did love marmalade. She was known to enjoy marmalade on toast at breakfast, taking it with her second cup of tea. The idea of the most dignified woman on earth squirreling away a sticky sandwich in a priceless designer handbag, just in case she got peckish, is the kind of human detail that made millions of people fall in love with her all over again in the final months of her life. The fifth object reveals that she was, in a way, the royal family's own secret photographer, a small camera. Among the items the Queen liked to keep close was a compact camera, and she did not carry it for decoration. She used it to take photographs of the visiting presidents, prime ministers, and other dignitaries who came to meet her. Picture that for a moment. The world's most important leaders would arrive for an audience with the Queen, expecting to be photographed by the official royal staff, never imagining that the monarch herself might quietly capture her own private snapshot of them. Throughout her long life, she was a genuine enthusiast for photography, building up personal albums and private images that the public rarely saw. It was a hobby, yes, but it was also a glimpse of how she viewed the grand parade of history passing before her. She was not only the subject of countless photographs, she was also, in her own quiet way, the one holding the camera, documenting the powerful people who came to pay their respects. The sixth object comes out at one of her greatest loves in life, the world of horse racing, a pair of binoculars. Queen Elizabeth was passionate about horses and horse racing from a very young age, and it remained one of the deepest joys of her entire life. She bred racehorses, she studied bloodlines with genuine and deep expertise, and she attended the races in person whenever she possibly could. And so, whenever she went to the track, she made sure to have a pair of binoculars with her, lifting them to her eyes to follow her beloved horses thundering down the final stretch. There is something deeply moving about this image. Strip away the title and the throne, and you have a woman leaning forward with binoculars pressed to her face, utterly absorbed in a race, cheering inside for an animal she had raised and loved. The racing newspaper, the Racing Post, was reportedly one of the publications she read most eagerly. Of all the objects in her life, the binoculars at the races may be the one that shows her at her most genuinely, unguardedly happy. Those who saw her at the racecourse often remarked that her whole face changed there. The careful, composed mask of the monarch fell away, and in its place was simply a thrilled, delighted woman watching the animals she adored. She could discuss breeding and bloodlines with the sharpest trainers in the country, and they would come away astonished at her knowledge. This was not a casual hobby she performed for the public. It was a true and lifelong love, perhaps the purest passion she ever allowed herself. And so those binoculars, lifted to her eyes as the horses rounded the final bend, were the lens through which the world glimpsed the real woman behind the crown, leaning forward, holding her breath, hoping with all her heart that her horse would cross the line first. The seventh object is not really an object she used, but an object she famously refused to use, and that absence says as much about her as anything she carried. A mobile phone. In an age when nearly every person on the planet became glued to a glowing screen, the Queen largely did without one. She was not a woman tethered to a smartphone, scrolling and texting and tapping away. According to those who knew her habits, she rarely used a mobile phone at all, perhaps only occasionally when she was driving herself around the private estates of Balmoral or Windsor or Sandringham on her days off. The reasoning was simple and rather grand. As one royal expert put it, anyone who needed to reach the Queen already knew exactly how to contact her. The eighth object is perhaps the most surprising of them all, because it is so cheap, so common, that you almost certainly have one in your own kitchen right now. A Tupperware container. The Queen of the United Kingdom, mistress of palaces filled with the finest bone china and gold and crystal in the world, ate her breakfast cereal from an ordinary plastic Tupperware tub. She kept her cereal stored in these humble containers because, quite simply, she believed it kept them fresher for longer. Her breakfast was famously modest, often just a bowl of cereal with brands as ordinary as Special K or cornflakes mentioned by those who served her, accompanied by some fruit. A former royal staff described how this frugality ran deep in her. She was, by the standards of her station, remarkably careful, even thrifty, a woman shaped by the rationing and hardship of the war years, who never saw the need for extravagance where simplicity would do. The image of those plastic tubs sitting in a royal kitchen beside all that priceless porcelain is the perfect symbol of the strange double life she led, supremely grand, and yet, in the smallest daily ways, astonishingly down to earth. The former royal chefs who worked in those kitchens told story after story of her dislike of waste and her preference for the plain over the fancy. She was not a person who lived to eat, as one of her chefs put it. She ate to live. The grand banquets, the towering displays of food, the elaborate state dinners, all of that was for show, for diplomacy, for the guests and the cameras. But when the Queen was alone, when no one was watching, she wanted nothing more than something simple and familiar. A bowl of ordinary cereal poured from an ordinary plastic tub, the kind of breakfast that a million of her subjects were eating at the very same moment in kitchens all across the land. The ninth object carries a piece of royal history within it that dates back nearly 2 centuries, a red leather menu book. Each day, the Queen's chef would not simply decide what she would eat. Instead, 3 menu suggestions for each meal were written out and presented to her in a red leather book, and she would go through them, ticking the dishes she wanted and crossing out the ones she did not. But here is the remarkable detail. These menus were written in French. This tradition dates all the way back to the reign of Queen Victoria, when a French head chef insisted that the palace menus be composed in his native language, and that custom simply never died. So more than 150 years later, Queen Elizabeth II was still reading her daily food choices in French, ticking and crossing through that red leather book, carrying forward a tiny ritual born in the Victorian age. It is a perfect example of how the monarchy works, how the smallest habits become frozen in time, repeated for generations, long after the original reason has faded into history. The 10th object is the one that defined her sense of duty more than any other, the one she touched every single day with only a couple of exceptions in the entire year, the red boxes. These were the dispatch boxes, the official cases delivered to her filled with government papers, state documents, letters, and reports from across her realms and the Commonwealth. Every day, no matter where she was in the world, the Queen was expected to read through these papers, to absorb the business of government, and to sign and approve the documents that required her attention. This was not a ceremonial gesture. It was real, constant, and relentless work, hours of reading every single day. It is said that the only days she was excused from her red boxes were Christmas Day and Easter Sunday. Think about the discipline in that. For 70 years, through good health and bad, through joy and grief, through war and peace, the red boxes arrived, and the Queen sat down and did her duty. That object, more than the crown, more than the throne, was the true symbol of her reign, a daily reminder that being a monarch was not a life of leisure, but a lifetime of quiet. Unending service. The boxes followed her everywhere. When she was at Buckingham Palace, they came. When she retreated to Balmoral in the Scottish Highlands for the summer, they came. When she sailed, when she traveled abroad, when she was unwell, the red boxes still arrived, and she still opened them. They contained the genuine business of the state, the documents that kept the machinery of government turning, and her signature and her attention were a constitutional necessity, not a formality. She read briefings on political matters she could never publicly comment on, approved appointments, absorbed the secret intelligence of the realm. By the end of her life, she had seen more state papers, met more prime ministers, and absorbed more of the hidden history of her age than almost any person alive. And it all flowed through those unassuming red leather boxes, carried to her each day for 70 unbroken years. The 11th object filled her mornings with sound and connected her to the ordinary rhythms of her nation, a vintage Roberts radio. As she ate her simple breakfast and went about the start of her day, the Queen liked to listen to the radio, and not just any radio. She owned a classic vintage Roberts radio, a quintessentially British brand, and she tuned it to BBC Radio 4 and its flagship morning news program, the Today program. So while the rest of Britain woke up and switched on the very same broadcast over their own breakfasts, the Queen was doing exactly the same thing, listening to the same voices, hearing the same news of the day. There is something wonderfully unifying about that picture, the monarch and her millions of subjects all tuned to the same station at the same hour of the morning. In a life so utterly different from that of ordinary people, the morning radio was a thread that connected her to them, a small daily habit she shared with the country she had served since she was a young woman. The 12th object surrounded her very first ritual of the day, the moment she woke and was gently eased into her morning. The silver teapots and the monogrammed napkin. Each morning at around 7:30, a tray was brought to the Queen's bedroom to begin her day. On that tray sat not one, but two solid silver teapots, one filled with Earl Grey tea and the other with hot water to dilute it to her exact preference. There was a fine china cup and saucer, and a linen napkin embroidered with her own royal initials. This was the very first thing of her day, a quiet, refined ritual of tea taken alone before the demands of the crown descended upon her. She took her Earl Grey without milk and without sugar, a simple cup to ease her into the morning. The detail of those two silver teapots, the monogrammed linen, the bone china, all for a single private cup of tea before anyone else was about, paints a portrait of a life where even the most ordinary act of having a morning cuppa was wrapped in centuries of elegance and care. The 13th object belonged to one of the most charming and surprisingly relatable habits of her entire day, her famous pre-lunch tipple, the gin and Dubonnet glass. Before lunch, the Queen was known to enjoy a particular cocktail, a mixture of gin and Dubonnet, which is a sweet wine-based aperitif. The drink was served in a specific way that she preferred, with a slice of lemon and plenty of ice. It was a small dailies, indulgence, a moment of pleasure in a life of duty, and it became one of the most beloved facts about her among the public. Now, over the years, there were wild exaggerations, rumors that she drank several cocktails a day, but those closest to her clarified that this was overblown. The truth was more modest, a single gin and Dubonnet before lunch, perhaps a dry martini before dinner and a glass of champagne in the evening. The gin she favored was very likely a brand that held a royal warrant, but it is that pre-lunch glass of gin and Dubonnet, simple and unpretentious, that endures as a delightful reminder that even a queen liked to unwind with a familiar drink, served just the way she liked it, day after day. The 14th object was the one that announced her presence before she ever said a word, the invisible signature she wore upon her skin, her perfume. Queen Elizabeth had a signature scent, and for her fragrance, she turned to a historic London perfume house called Floris. In 1971, Floris of London was granted the royal warrant as Her Majesty's exclusive perfumers, and her beloved scent was a fragrance called White Rose, a soft and elegant floral blend. She's said to have worn it on her wedding day and throughout her life, a constant, faithful perfume that traveled with her across the decades. Another fragrance she was fond of was a classic French scent from the house of Guerlain, a powdery romantic perfume created back in 1912, beloved for its soft, dusk-like blend of florals and warmth. There is an intimacy to perfume that nothing else quite matches. It is the one part of a person that lingers in a room after they have gone, a private signature most of the world never gets close enough to notice. For the few who did stand near the Queen, that delicate scent of white roses was a small, personal detail of a woman the entire world thought it knew, but few ever truly met. And so we arrive at the 15th and final object, one that turned the simple act of getting dressed into an instrument of international diplomacy, her brooch. Throughout her reign, the Queen owned an extraordinary collection of brooches, dozens upon dozens of them, and she did not pin them on at random. She used them, deliberately and brilliantly, as a silent language of respect and meaning. When she traveled to other nations, she would often wear a brooch that carried the symbols or the colors of the country she was visiting, a quiet gesture of honor to her hosts. Arriving in Australia, she might wear a diamond brooch shaped like the wattle, Australia's national flower, paired with the nation's golden colors. Visiting Canada, the maple leaf would appear. Historians came to call this sartorial diplomacy, the art of using clothing and jewelry to send messages of friendship and goodwill without ever speaking them aloud. In an age of careful neutrality, where a monarch could not openly express opinions, the brooch became her voice. A simple piece of jewelry, pinned to her coat each morning, was transformed into one of the most subtle and effective diplomatic tools the modern monarchy ever possessed. So what do all of these objects, taken together, finally tell us about the woman who used them? Look back over the list, and a remarkable portrait emerges, a handbag that spoke in secret, a wedding ring born from a melted tiara, and a nugget of Welsh gold, a girlhood penknife, a marmalade sandwich for emergencies, a camera that quietly photographed the powerful, binoculars at the races, a refusal of the mobile phone, cheap Tupperware in a palace kitchen, a red leather menu written in French, the relentless red boxes of duty, a vintage radio shared with her nation, silver teapots for a solitary cup of tea, a daily gin and Dubonnet, a scent of white roses, and a brooch that spoke the language of nations. These were not the objects you might imagine surrounding a queen. There are no jeweled scepters here, no golden orbs, no crowns dripping with the wealth of empire. Instead, there are small, human, practical, sometimes astonishingly ordinary things, and that is precisely the point. Because the great secret of Queen Elizabeth II, the thing that made her so beloved by so many across so many decades, was that she lived a life of unimaginable grandeur. With the heart and habits of an essentially private, practical, and frugal woman, she carried a penknife and saved a sandwich for later. She ate cereal from a plastic tub and listened to the same morning radio as everyone else. She turned a handbag into a secret code and a brooch into a message of peace. She did her paperwork every single day for 70 years without complaint. The objects of her ordinary day were not symbols of excess. They were symbols of duty, of discipline, of a quiet and steady character that never wavered. The next time you see one of those countless photographs of her, with the little bag on her arm and a brooch on her coat, you will know that you are not just looking at a queen. You are looking at a woman surrounded by the small, secret, deeply human objects of an extraordinary life, each one telling a story the world walked past for 70 years without ever stopping to see.